Hey, Chad, welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Hey, Corey, happy to be here, man.
So, we were talking actually before we started the show about today's going to be a fun little podcast. Is we're going to talk about, I think, the part that not everybody really wants to disclose or discuss, and that's the dirt. It's not all sunsets and palm trees, Chad, right?
That's right. And anyone who tells you they are, don't believe them.
They're lying. So you recently had a couple deals that that you're putting together now, and just give us the whole feedback of what's going on, where you're at, and tell us some stories. Let's unpack some stuff, man.
Yeah, let's do it. So, I think most recent lesson learned is we've recently closed a 110-unit deal. It was a $9 million acquisition. Great property, guys. Great property. Learned some lessons along the way on it, though. And, these are good lessons to learn. Like, while you're winning, you figure out you could have won better, right. So it's that kind of thing. But one of them is around how we structured the deal, which we actually were able to restructure it as we're on the way to closing. So I'll tell you that lovely story. And another one is how we chose to source the equity for the deal. Both of those are pretty interesting topics.
Oh, man, let's jump in. So this is cool. So we set up a good-sized deal, and now we're going to gyrate it and talk about, okay, so you're in it, and then you had to restructure your deal.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Think about deal structure and underwriting in two parts, right? Part one is the property. We all know how to underwrite property and look at, like, what is this thing going to do? What are my rent bumps? What are my expenses? All that kind of stuff, right? Let's just assume that is good, okay? Mm-hmm. Now you have to decide, what are you going to do with the money this thing is spitting off, both in cash flow and in capital event, right?
Yep.
So we've been pretty successful with the keep it simple, stupid mentality, right? Just KISS when in doubt. And so we've run some pretty vanilla, equity splits, like a 70-30, a 60-40, just straight across the board, whatever it is, right? Well, that works really well. We really cut our teeth on some smaller multifamily, like call it 50-unit acquisitions. I love those, man. I'm not scared of them because you can usually buy them from unsophisticated sellers who don't know how to run them. You put three together and all of a sudden you got economies of scale, so we did a lot of that mess. Now we're buying bigger properties. And so part one of that is I can go raise with my team $1.5 million like that, right? From $50,000 and $100,000, $200,000 investors. That's really easy. Now you start talking about $4, $5, $6 million raises, it gets a little tough. Just do the math. At $50,000, if you're accepting that as your min, right? Do the math on a $5 million investment, right? How many investors is that?
That's a lot.
So, yeah, it's a lot of people. So I think the biggest thing that we learned on this one, Corey, is raise your minimum, right? Because you ask for 50, you get 50. And I think you actually, slapped me on that last time we talked. And you can always choose to go and accept lower investments, right? That's penciled in the PPM. But if you ask for the minimum, you get the minimum, right?
Amen.
Now, the other part we learned is not all money, not every dollar from investors is created equal.
Right.
And if, let's say you're going after a $50 million property and you need to raise $10 million just for round numbers, right? Yep. I promise you, with the exception of maybe like Neil Bauer or someone like that who has this massive platform, you're not raising that from individual investors, right? You get one or two guys or institutions who come in and write a $5 to $8 million check and you raise the rest. Well, guess what? That equity, when someone writes a big check like that, their goals are very, very different. Like you and I, man, we want to make money. We're looking for 25, 30 IRRs and trying to really just knock it out of the park and double down and keep going. Those guys have their money, man. They're just trying. Now, if they're managing money, they're just trying to skim a percentage and keep the money growing. Yep. If it's their money, family office, for example, they're just trying to keep it growing and have as little risk as possible. They don't want a deal going sideways and losing $8 million, right?
Exactly.
So what we learned on this one, and so we started out with a straight 70-30 split on this deal. And it was decent at that point, but think of it this way, at 70-30 split, 70% to the investors, every dollar is worth the same amount that comes in on $3.5 million, right?
Right.
Towards the end of it, we got introduced to an equity group, and that equity group said, look, I'll give you half the raise, but all we want is a 10 IRR. So I'm like, well, this is great. What's the catch? In exchange for that, they don't want any of the other upside. They just want their 10 IRR, but they want to get paid first at sale.
They want to be subordinate. Yeah.
Right, right. They want to be just behind the loan, and if it happens to go sideways, they get their money back first. Well, guess what? When you start taking cheaper money for half, if you have the same bucket of money, remember we have the same property over here that's performing the same way. You take the same bucket of money that is your upside, and now you're giving a smaller amount of it to the guy who brought half the money and a bigger amount of it to the other guy that brought half the money. All of a sudden, you can make a pretty attractive deal, extremely attractive, and even execute on it in less time. That took a 7-year hold, 2x equity multiple to a 4.5-year hold with better returns.
Yeah. Dude, just because of that, right?
Just because of that. And fortunately, I'll tell you, the weeks leading up to closing were crazy because I had to rewrite the PPM and have 40 investors sign it. But, they were happy to do it for.
Yeah, but so because they're going to close. I mean, so at the end of the day, that's a great deal. They're like, okay, listen, here's what we're going to have to do. You're going to have to be subordinate behind this, but here's why. And listen, it doesn't really, at the big scheme of things, they didn't know any better anyways. Mm-hmm. Your normal $100,000, they just want to be in your deal, and the big money is just trying to protect itself.
That's right. Everyone has different goals, man. And the $100,000 investor, they want that 20 IRR. Now they're going to get a 25, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the other guys get their 10, and they're happy as a clam. So lesson learned. It's easier to talk to big checks because they're not going to call you every week wondering how their money's doing, right?
Right.
And B, it's a lot easier.
They just want to understand your business plan and be like, okay, and they're underwriting you as the operator. In their eyes, they're not putting all the equity in. If they're putting half the equity, that's a good thing for them, right?
Right. And what you said right there is important. The more sophisticated the investor, they could almost give a rip about the deal. They care about you. If they believe in you and they think you know how to evaluate a deal, they're going to invest in you all day long. They can find a deal anywhere, right?
Yeah. Money's always, holds a lot of the keys. But here's the real truth, and I think you hit on this pretty good, Chad, is that money people still have problems too.
Yeah.
Right? And so they got to place capital, and they're looking for operators that they can know, like, and trust to do that. So you provide a solution for them as well. And not all money's super ass greedy.
That's right. That's right. And that's the thing. I mean, if their alternative is, I go put it in, I just lost a bunch in the stock market, or, I've been invested in commercial office. I mean, 10 IRR multifamily looks great, so
yeah.
That's the thing, is really understanding what your equity requirements or the requirements of your equity partners are, and how to structure that capital stack in the most efficient way. Like, get the most efficient senior debt, get as much of that lender money as you can, because that's cheap money, right?
It's the cheapest.
That's the cheapest money. Then get your big equity partners, because they're also cheap, and they're more like long term. They could give a rip about cash on cash return. Usually, they care about the upside.
Was it hard to get your? So did your attorney, and you can disclose who you use or not, it doesn't matter.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But have a problem with writing that subordinate piece, or was it just like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that?
No, not at all. I mean, I think so. It was Mauricio Raould, right? Premier Law Group, great attorney.
Yep.
I believe you guys use him as well. Yeah, he was fantastic through the whole thing. I think he was a little grumpy with me for how much we were changing it in 2 weeks prior to close, but we did get it done.
But who cares, right? So listen, but as long as everybody signs off on it, it doesn't matter.
That's right. And we got it done. Having a nimble attorney, which he was, right, was key, because he really helped us navigate that. When you have an attorney this is all he does, is structure deals like this, right? It kind of helps us understand what's market, what's not.
And understanding that along the way there could be bumps and bruises, right? Now, what you're not really telling, and I gotta get this out. So 2 weeks to closing, Chad's got a big freaking anxiety attack coming. I just can feel it, because you're trying to put together this big tranche of money because you don't have it in the bag yet.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So
that's exactly it. Yeah. And when we're talking about half the raise, I mean, we had the other half of the money, and we actually wound up taking some equity out of this deal and moving it to another deal. So we had call it 3/4 of the money, right?
Yep. Okay. 3/4. There you go.
Right. But we decided, hey, we're going to take half from this group, and so we replaced some money, but yeah, we weren't there yet 2 weeks prior to close. And so there was definitely a little bit of anxiety of, man, do I push the closing date? Do I risk, frustrating the Fannie Mae loan committee, all this kind of stuff. And then so there's a lot of things that just had to happen in that 2 weeks.
And this is very typical of every raise that I've ever done, right? It's not always, because there's lots of people that commit that are great people. And then at the end, they're like, man, something come up and...
Yeah, life happens, man. Timing is everything.
Yeah. And so 2 weeks, a couple $1 million, you're like, well, okay, hold on. And then you start, but it really puts you in a challenge. That's what you said. This was the aha, right?
Yeah.
Once you're like, oh my God, because from now on, what are you doing?
Well, now on, I'm talking to bigger equity partners and structuring this from the beginning.
This is the way, right? It's kind of like the Mandalorian, where everybody says,
"This is the way."
This is the way, right? Everybody repeats it.
Well, here's the deal. Like I've been racking my brain, right, for the past 2 years, looking at some of these like B+ assets that are trading at 4 caps, and I know the syndicators who are doing these deals, and I'm like, how are they buying it here and still offering a 25 IRR to what they're marketing to me? How? And that's the way, right? They're structuring the capital in an efficient way.
Yep, they'll take their big chunks of corporate money and that want that subordination, right? That want to be in first place, and boom, that's done. And then they're just raising the extra so they don't have to pay out as much, even though it looks good on paper. They've already placed their senior debt or their senior equity first and gave them what they wanted.
Right.
That's really neat. It's funny because you're just talking about this, and I'm in negotiations with a guy right now for the same type of deal, and I would have never thought of this. Right. I'm just glad you're bringing this up. He brought it up to me, and I was like, oh. That's doable. I was like, okay, well, that's doable. He's not asking for anything hard. I said, this is actually simple. I'm like, absolutely, we can put something like that together.
Well, and here's the thing. People get nervous about preferred returns and preferred equity and stuff. Look, if your deal's good enough, like you're going to cover that. Like a 10 IRR is not a lot of money, right?
No.
So hopefully you're covering that on. If you're not covering a 10 IRR safely, don't buy the deal, So
yeah, and this guy he wanted a higher pref, but it was still lower overall. Right, it was good. It was a win-win, and it was like, man, that's easy. So now we got to find a new deal to put him in. All right, so that's a great lesson, by the way, Chad. I love that's a new way to open up more sophisticated capital that has a bigger tranche of money that most people are probably afraid to go talk to, but don't be afraid because you are offering good solutions and build yourself a track record.
Well, and here's the best thing, Corey. Like you almost kind of it's that have do be mentality, right? Maybe you feel you're not ready to talk to these guys, right?
Yeah.
Start the conversation. Don't use them, and then when you go close a deal without them, like, oh, they didn't need me. When you don't need that partner, like you're in a much more powerful position on the next one because now they know you, they see you got it done without them.
You close,
and they're going to be,
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
There is power. Just power through, get something done. Telling people no is a very powerful thing. Because it creates scarcity.
Yeah.
And scarcity is what okay, well, I don't need to be even though I got big money, because money sometimes got to be slapped around. Right? For use of a better term, this is a fun podcast, right?
I love how raw you are, and I love it.
Sometimes you got to slap money around and be like, because they don't know it's not good for them. And sometimes they put on their pants and they think they've put on a tank. And you got to remind them that no, like we all work together, bro. Mm-hmm. But listen, they respond really well, and you can do it very respectfully, just like you said. The best way to teach and how you slap money is you say, "No, thank you."
Yeah.
Sorry, it's full.
Mm-hmm.
that's
the best
way
thing
to slap it, man.
It's the best thing you can tell equity because, like, you can do all you can to try to push people to get their money in on time, but when you say, "Sorry, it's full," you missed your shot. Tell you what, they'll be the first one in that deal next time.
I'm telling you, like the next one loads up the gun, right?
Yeah.
I call that programming your capital, right? There's no better way to program capital to act responsibly, act fast, and do what they say they're going to do because the fear of FOMO, fear of missing out, becomes very real for them once they have that taste in their mouths.
Yeah, and you know what else? Capital becomes very sticky, right? As soon as you start to do well for them, especially big money, it decides, I don't want to pay taxes. We're going to 1031. And then that 500 grand turns into $1 million, turns into 2 million, turns into 5 million. And before you know it, you're bidding on the Empire State Building, Amen. So it's like, yeah.
That's the beauty about this business and raising money. Mm-hmm. It's a snowball rolling down and it only gets bigger, right?
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, one of the things you should note from that story and your listeners should note is that I could have had analysis paralysis and never gotten the deal done because I was trying to figure out how to structure the deal, right? Instead, we went with what we knew, We improved it. It's almost like we're souping up the engine as we're driving the freaking car, right? Like sometimes you just have to learn on the fly. Now, maybe don't like learn that you missed underwriting the property by 50% and you're totally wrong, can't do the deal on the fly. But, but in terms of some of these optimization factors, you're not going to know it all before you take action.
Yeah, so you're going to make the tweaks as you go.
Yeah, you got to be in the business.
And you got to be a little bit moldable, right? Because you got to be shifty. You got to be like, okay, I'm hearing what everybody's saying. So how do I make it work? How do I attract capital? Because there's lots of ways to lose in this game. There's lots of ways to win. Right?
That's right.
So it really is just being and understanding your principles, and then you can make your small tweaks and adjustments as you go. So that's one. You said you had a couple on this one, another story. And then we have one more story. We have 3 good stories.
We have a bunch of stories. I'm going to give you a funny story because, like, every deal I do, I learn something or I see something I've never seen before. Okay.
Yep.
Day before closing, I send my property management team to the property to go walk the vacant units because typically, and if you don't put this in your contracts, you should, you get a credit if a unit is not rent ready at closing of, $2,500, $5,000, whatever the number is y'all agree on. So we had 2 vacant units. About 6 o'clock on the evening, the day before closing, as I'm finishing up reviewing the HUD statement, I get a call from my regional and she goes, Chad, I don't know how to tell you this. I'm like, okay, this isn't good. And she goes, well, the first unit was clean, and we get to the second one, and we see a broken window, and we hear rustling inside and other noises, like noises. They knock on the door, it gets quiet. The door has been kicked in, so as they knock, it kind of opens. In that unit are 6 butt-naked homeless people having a drug, sex, and alcohol orgy in Unit E3. Never seen this before in my life. So you want to bet that way. Now, the sad thing is I tend to think like 6 steps ahead before I speak, Yeah. And so I was already on to like, oh my gosh, what condition is this unit in? And the next thing out of my mouth was, well, did you get pictures? She was like, what? Excuse me? But anyway,
filming that.
Yeah. So
of the unit.
of the unit. Yeah. I feel like I offended her at first. But anyway, so long story short, making that call to the seller on the night before closing was fun, but we wound up, they were reasonable. We settled up and got a credit for that unit. And I'm sure it's finished airing out at this point. But
yeah, that's crazy
stuff.
The things you see in units, right? Especially when you're doing, I think I can do 3 or 4 shows. I was just talking about, tell me about the worst things you've seen doing due diligence, right? Because I've seen it all, and it's bad. Yeah. Like, I've seen a hoarder galore. I've seen hoarders. You're like, you guys know you have a hoarder here, right? And they know. And like the seller, the property manager knows, but they've never done anything about it.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what?
It's pretty bad. We've actually had a hoarder, like not only were there German cockroaches everywhere because of this was a hoarder that kept bags of trash in the unit. It smelled so bad. Oh, man. But like we found live animals in that unit that had somehow gotten in. It was just incredible. So yeah, we've seen a lot. I think the other lesson on this deal, and then we can move to another dirty one, it kind of goes hand in hand with this one. And I think we may have hit them at the same time, but understanding that the bigger, and now this isn't always true, but just understand that the bigger raise you're trying to do, you really need to start asking for a higher minimum because, $3.5, $4, $5 million even at 100,000 a pop is a lot of people.
30 people.
That's a lot of K1s. That's a lot of phone calls they're going to be calling you. And guess what? The lower investment that you accept, the higher call volume you're going to be fielding because it likely is their first or last 50 grand, Yeah. So just really be careful with that and feel free to take smaller investments. And I'm not saying like, if don't let someone play if they don't have it, but just try not to have $150,000 investors in your deal because I promise you're going to pull your hair out, you know?
I learned that lesson really early on. And I told you guys my story about being a financial advisor when I was, I think I learned that lesson from Edward Jones. I was calling people on bonds, right? And I was like, hey, if you have the money today, I think you should spend $5,000 on this bond. And my mentor looked at me and he's like, slaps me. He's like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, you don't ever ask for $5,000. Ask for, it was like, ask for 50, ask for 75. don't ask for five. He's like, do you make any commission? Like, he was all about commission. You make any commission of 5,000? I was like, well, I just wanted to do something. He's like, no. And so I just, did I follow his advice initially when I moved into real estate? No, I was like 50,000. You got 50,000, give it to me. And then I slapped myself this time and said, dude, you've got too many, people, and they're probably not the right ones. And so we went to 100, and that was a game changer for us as well. Like, it really is. Wow. It really does. And you still accept, like you said, Chad.
Yeah.
The people that you need to, that maybe it's not even not their first 50, but they're just real hesitant. I always say some people are just very risk adverse, so risk adverse that they really want to just put their foot in the pool.
Right.
Like,
right.
It's
got to kind of be a pay to play. Yeah. It's got to kind of be a pay to play, because like I know, and I can think of 10 names, I'm not going to say them, but 10 names in this last deal who, if we had asked for 200, they would have given it, but we asked for 50. So they gave 50,
Yeah, exactly. Kind of they'll give you what the minimum is. It was so prevalent when I looked at with the moment, the next deal that I decided I'm not doing 50 and I raced to 100, all I see is hundreds.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, son of a biscuit. Right? Like, that is so much easier. I did a lot less work. I had a lot less calls. But again, asking for bigger pieces of money, that's a great one. I mean, that goes into this deal with what you did with the restructure and getting way big chunks of money too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's the theme right now.
Right.
Ask for more money.
Yeah, exactly. So lessons learned there. And by the way, these were like, if we had closed in the original path, it still would have been fine. This wasn't like a detrimental lesson learned, but it's going to make scaling easier, right?
Yeah.
If we start looking at, $10 million deals and stuff.
Well, that's how the game's play too, right, Chad? As you go forward, like when we first start, when you're a newbie, if you're listening to this and you're a newbie, you start at the cheapest deal that you can feel like you raised money for. Like, that's where you cut your teeth.
Well, and here's the deal, guys. Like, I'm fortunate that I play with an all-star team, right? I mean, Quattro Capital, we have, 50 years aggregate experience. Well, I'll tell you what, my experience, Chad Sutton, is about 3 years. Okay. I'm very young in this business. I'm playing with bigger players because I got lucky, I think, right place, right time. But, I just quit my job 6 months ago, and you know what? Boom. I mean, that's sometimes you got to make a risk or take a risk, but we've bought everything from 10 units to 35 units. And we kind of played that game for a while to really earn our credibility, as a group.
Cut your teeth. Feel like you're like, this is the way.
Yeah. And so, like, guys, this can be done, right? And I'll tell you, for every bad story I tell you, I've got 10 good ones. I'm sharing the dirt right here, but it's not as hard as it looks, right? Just make sure you have enough margin to operate, and time heals. And this next story is going to be about that. Time heals all, as long as you can cash flow.
Boom. Let's talk about that. I want to hear this one.
So this one is dirty, right? And I'll tell you, we bought a property on March 15th, 2020.
Okay. Yeah.
Everyone remembers what happened on March 18th, right? Our evictions got taken. So we bought this property. It was our first and only Class D property. We bought it internally. We did not buy it with investor dollars. And we knew it was a heavy turn. It was in West Atlanta, gentrifying area. There's a whole revitalization project coming down MLK, right? And we bought it knowing that half the tenants they needed to go day one. They were drug abusers. They were not paying rent, all that. We're like, okay, fine. We will evict them, get them out. We'll do cash for keys, whatever. 3 freaking days later, the world has never seen an eviction stick get removed by the government, right? Yeah. Like, how could you, it's obvious now, but how could you know that? We weren't scared of a heavy turn back then, right?
Right.
And we're still not. You just have to know the rules. So we take this property over. It's 36 units, not a big one. Mistake number one, we didn't capitalize it properly because we bought it ourselves and we thought, oh, we'll just, we've got 50% occupancy. We'll just bleed the property for a little while to fund the renovations, and then we'll start cash flowing it after that. This would be easy peasy lemon squeezy, right?
Yeah.
And so someone gets on TV and says, guess what? You don't have to pay rent because you can't be evicted. And they take that to heart, right? Because it's that kind of tenant base.
Yo, listen, I got one of those tenant bases in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And they all talk to each other.
Yep. And so that happened, right? And so the ones that weren't paying already and were already breaking the law and stuff, everyone else figured out, and no one paid for several months, right? Very little. And so number one, we were cash strapped because we didn't. If we had known better, we would have made sure we put a bunch of money in the bank to make sure that property, we could bleed for a while and get it turned around. At that time, also, who knew
But
how
this
long
was
we'd have
supposed to be a
bleed.
quick turn. Like you was like, hey, listen, we'll take everybody to court.
Well, that's Atlanta. Atlanta, you used to be able to get them out in 30 days.
Yeah,
It was no problem.
It's a very easy eviction process.
Exactly. So that's what we were expecting. Well, then all of a sudden we had 50% of the tenant base that we couldn't evict, and we had to basically wait till their leases expired, sue for possession. Some of them we just gave them $1,000 and paid for the U-Haul and said, get out.
For keys. Wow.
Yeah. And that sometimes works, but you'd be surprised. These people are smarter than you think. Some of them said, no, I'm good. I'll just stay.
I'll get another 60 days. Get me out of here legally.
Exactly. So that happened, and it took time, but probably 6 months later, we let that in. Now, Freddie Mac, the other problem, this is the other one, we didn't put the right debt on this deal, right? This should have been a bridge loan all day long. We put a Freddie Mac SBL on it because it looked good, right? Mm-hmm. And so we frustrated Freddie Mac because we let the occupancy get down to 40% as we were just getting stuff out.
Right, because they're watching your occupancy all the time, and they're like, you got to report that stuff.
Yeah, they wanted above 85%.
What's your debt service coverage ratio looking like? They're like, well, you're not hitting it.
Yeah. Now, we didn't miss a single payment. I'm going to tell you that. That's the only way in this business you really lose, guys, is you miss your debt payment, they take the property away. We did not miss a single payment. We're not late on a single payment, right? We actually had to feed the property a little bit, right? So, we should have fed it with that much ahead of time, but we had to feed it a little bit, right?
Hey, that monthly call with all your partners. Hey,
yep.
We're going to pony up this month.
Yep. And again, it was internal, so we were able to do it ourselves, right?
Yep.
But time heals.
But you're still working on your program, and you know what's going on.
Yeah. And so time heals all in real estate, guys, as long as you can cash flow and cover the expenses if you have to. So, whether that cash is coming from you or the property, right? As long as you keep it going. In this case, it was coming from us. So we bought this thing at $2.5 million. Not a year later, we are now ready to sell it because we just have bad juju on this one. So we're going to sell it and make our stuff and get out. But this property is now, it started off averaging $703, right? It is now renting up at $950 to $1,000. Okay. We are 100% occupied except for general turnover now. Everyone is paying rent. They are either Section 8 or charity backed, right?
Yep.
And so we now have a great story that the property is cash flowing. The property is, this is an instance. 3.5 to 4, honestly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of international money coming in interested in the West Side, and they are paying for property.
So you bought it for how much?
2.5. So it was like what, 80 a door or 70 a door? I think.
Like $1.5 million in a year's time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing is like it hasn't been a.
Can I see? I mean, that didn't look like an easy button. Okay, but
it wasn't an easy
I'm looking
button.
at it right now. It feels like a real shiny. I just want to hit it. Easy button. Way to make it look easy, Chad.
Yeah, it was a tough one. So, and I mean, the story, like just walking through that. I mean, yeah, we had 3 shootings on the property. We had them, and one of them was a murder, right? We had to really work on getting the feisty, we'll say, tenants out. Now, the good tenants, they stuck with us. That there were about 30%.
They thank you when you get rid of all the crap, too, don't
those
they?
people had been there for 30 years. They'd seen the property go up and down. They were so happy, and they were policing themselves. Once they saw what we were doing and we were fixing stuff and getting riffraff out, they were policing that property. And so that was good to get that buy-in. And then eventually, as we got approved by Atlanta Housing Authority, as we got approved by these charities, these people would pay rent on their behalf up front to have quality housing,
Yes, and you're doing the work. That's when that's doing workforce or Section 8 housing, government housing or whatever you want to call it, doing it the right way. And when you do it right, you can really, really win. So good job. Now,
and Corey, it all comes back, like this is all, the art of the deal, guys, is deal structure, right? We structured this deal incorrectly, okay? It was not done the way it should have been done. Had we structured it properly with an interest-only bridge loan that we could refinance, we probably just refinance it and keep the property. But now we're like, well, we're too far in. We need an equity event to get out at this point, So we're going to sell it.
You guys, fed it with your own money.
Right.
And now it's like, hey, we need to get our own money back.
Right.
But listen, you're probably better off anyways, just because it's it's not what you want to do now. Like now that
No.
now that you're buying $10 million deals, you're like, yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Let's just take our money. It was cool.
Time per unit was way too high.
We got the badge for that one.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, guys, though, if you're going to learn a lesson, it's nice to learn it at that level and not at the $10 million level.
Amen.
So
that's what's some great lessons today, man, dude. It's funny. I love this game of real estate because you learn and you hear so many different stories of operations and structure and what I did right and what I did wrong. And man, for those listening right now, this is the kind of stuff, this is why you should actually love this podcast and share it with all your friends, because I don't know anybody else that brings on true guests and we talk about the dirt.
Yeah,
right?
The real stuff, what really happens in this world.
Yeah, because everybody wants to, because you can tell the same story that you just did and say, hey, I bought something for this and I sold it for this a year later. Ain't I cool?
Yeah.
And no one wins from that.
And I've got 10 of those stories if you want to hear them, but you don't learn a thing from it. Everything went well there, Yeah.
So. But it's the ones that are a little bit weird that goes, kind of crazy, and it tests you and it helps you grow. You're like, okay, and it gives you resilience, right? And in front of your investors, it gives you street cred.
You want to talk about resilience? I'm going to give you one and now this portfolio is doing very well. These were like averaging 450 to 500. I'm renovating fully and renting at 800, and I can't run them fast enough, right? This is an East Tennessee portfolio. So that's a good story. But my other COVID story, and again, you learn the biggest lessons when you're under duress, right? We were at the finish line. We had $250,000 hard on an acquisition of 70-unit portfolio in Knoxville, Tennessee. And 12 days from closing, our bridge lender, this one was structured properly, by the way, our bridge lender decides, we're just going to exit the market because we can't hit our margin calls and we don't know what we can sell these loans for. So, by the way, here's the 30.
And you've already given them money too, right?
Oh, yeah. Of the 35 grand we gave you for third party, or you gave us for third party reports, here's the 7 grand we haven't spent. Good luck. Still raw about that, right?
I've had that happen.
The lender was Ready Capital, by the way. I don't mind slandering them all day long. They've burned me twice, so I will never
Ready
use them.
Capital?
Mm-hmm.
Dude, did the
Ready
same
Capital.
thing. I did the same thing with me on
Really?
Yes, I swear to God. Screw those people.
Well, good. Hopefully we just lost them like 100,000 customers with this podcast. But
right. Go to Lima One.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, their terms are great. They write the best terms out there, but whether or not they're going to close is a whole nother question. So anyway, 12 days from closing, I find myself short $4 million with 250 grand hard and a seller who's 1031ing into a building he's buying. So he's also negotiating with his seller.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Anyone else probably would have folded and said, all right, well, I guess we're done. Good try, guys. We'll just leave the business and take our loss and be done. It took us 3 more months to close that deal, and we were negotiating for extensions. We went through every single lender that every suspect you can imagine. And you know what? On the last day, we agreed to make 5 more calls. And by the way, this came with a lot of gut checks because at this point, all the predatory lenders, I call them, came out. The 9%, 3 points in, 3 points out. If you slip, we're going to take the property and everything you own type of stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're questioning ourselves.
They want to do the deal.
Oh, they really want to do the deal. It's like, okay, well.
They want your deal.
Yeah. Those are lend-to-own lenders, right?
Yeah.
But we were gut checking every night at midnight being like, hey, do we still want to do this deal? Like, can we responsibly place this capital or should we just take the loss? And our investors were great because of how well we communicated through it, right? And we always said the risk is on us. Like, you guys are going to lose nothing. And we wound up landing a better loan than we started with from a pool of money we didn't know existed. Because on the last day before we were going to pull the plug, we agreed to make 5 more phone calls. And my 5th phone call before we were going to pull the plug was this lender, right? Yeah. And didn't know. I thought they were a bridge lender, had no idea what they were. It turns out they were a nonprofit community development lender. They lend banks money because the banks want tax credits from the government for making these kind of community reinvestment loans, right? Yep. We had no idea this existed. So now we're smart enough to know. We asked the lenders, where does your money come from? Because all the ones who were selling secondary markets, they're packaging them up and selling them as investments. Those guys were all out of the game. But, some banks and lenders like this who were specialty niche lenders who lend off their balance sheet, they were still in the game. So also understand where your lenders are.
Sometimes even credit unions. I've seen credit unions be able to do some really cool stuff that you would never oh, wait, you can do that loan?
Yeah.
And if they know and like you and they've seen a track record and you're local to their market, man, like things can happen. But so again, that's a perseverance piece.
Yes.
Which is pretty much, I feel like it's 90% of our job as entrepreneurs is to persevere.
That's right.
Is
That's
to keep on being resilient until you find the door that will open.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to step into it, and then you own it, and you own the results.
And I'll tell you how much we learned from having gone through those couple of battle tests. I mean, it's you can't read that in a book, Corey.
You know, you can't read that in a book. And think about how far you went down the rabbit hole to and that was, sometimes in those stressful moments, like you just went through, I'm sure those were hard conversations when you're talking about your 250 that you're going to, and by then it's probably more because you had to pay for those extensions, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it got more expensive over those 3 months.
Right? Every time you're renegotiating at the end, it doesn't usually bear well. It's worse terms.
Yeah.
And more money, and then more money that's committed to extend, and everybody's getting a little, because you don't know when they're going to really say, this is it.
Yeah.
Right? And you're still trying to, luckily you had a seller that wanted to sell.
That's right.
Because he wanted to buy something new.
He was motivated, and he was hard on his property, so he would have lost money too. But I tell you what, it was getting expensive for him, or so he told us, and he made it expensive for us. But it was all earnest money, so it all went to the property eventually.
Yeah,
right.
As long as
as long as we closed.
As long as you closed, dude. What a great day! What a great interview today. Because I love when just good stories of how things can go wrong, and even though because lemonade is like the most valuable thing in the world. It's made by lemons, by the way.
That's right.
And so that is our job, is to figure out how to, and you, Chad, you've gave us some great examples of how you actually have a really nice lemonade stand.
And here's the thing,
with a
guys,
big bright ass sign.
Yeah. And Corey, I know you've got some of these stories because I've heard them, right? But I mean, if you're looking at investing with a group, get them to tell you some of these stories and see if you can ascertain how they carry themselves. Because I promise you, nothing is going to follow that pro forma they show you. Not a single deal you do, even if it's good, right? That model will be wrong day one. But the question is, how will that team react to the adversity that will come on that deal? And is that the team you want to trust?
Amen. Right. Great words of wisdom. Chad, a couple of just last little quick questions on, are you reading any books right now that you have been that's inspired you, that you want to share?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm an avid reader, and my coaches all encourage me to read regularly. This is something I struggle with, Corey. There's a book called Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. And the whole crux of this book, the whole message is, most of us, we are programmed from elementary school, right? To say, if you ask your neighbor for help, you're cheating. You have to do it all yourself. Figure out how to do it yourself. Well, that's just false in the entrepreneurial world, right? Look at Richard Branson, right? That man is responsible for over 7,000 companies. You think he's doing it all himself? No. He finds who can help him accomplish every little thing, and he steers the ship. It is something I struggle with because I've been a doer my whole life, right? And most of us think we can do it better than everyone else. But so that is the best book. And the other one is Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek. My partner Maurice lives by this, and I'm finally seeing what makes him tick reading this. But it really talks about, if you're looking at leaving your job, or you're looking at optimizing your time spent on your W-2 so that you can focus on investing or building a business or whatever it is, read that book, because it really helps you realize, how do I optimize the use of my time?
It'll stretch you in how efficient your model is, and how really inefficient you really are.
And how inefficient corporate America is. Because we're programmed to think we need to be in the office 9 to 5, shuffling papers, drinking coffee at the water cooler to look busy. Yeah.
Instead of just doing really good work and get it done.
Right.
Man, appreciate that. Last word you'd want to tell, if you could tell new investors anything, what advice would you give them?
I would say be aware of the details, but stay out of the weeds. Okay. You need to understand the details and be able to talk to them, but don't get so lost in the weeds that you never pull the trigger on a deal, because I promise you, every weed you're looking at is going to be different on day one anyway. So understand the risks, understand the weeds, but keep it simple. Just structure on fundamentals and get it done.
Right on. Chad, how do people get a hold of you, man? How do they find you guys?
Easiest way, go to my website, thequattroway.com. I'm sure Corey can put that in the show notes for you, but that'll have access to every one of my managing partners, myself included, our calendars, our emails. Reach out to us. We love talking about this stuff. Happy to connect.
Right on, right on. Guys, listen, thanks again for tuning in for this amazing show. And Chad, you've just been an amazing guest and really revealing that, listen, it's not all sunsets and palm trees out there. Sometimes life throws you lots of lemons. Chad is a master lemonade stand. He knows how to take those lemons, put the right ingredients together, and make something that's sweet and tastes really good. Elvis, I think, liked lemonade too. So, guys, if you believe it, you can achieve it. And your paradise is absolutely possible.